And then we'll do some little topics. But topics today are going to be concatenation functions, the if function, and the VLOOKUP function. So we're going to start off with a concatenation. And what is a concatenation? Basically, it joins several text strings into one text string. The concatenation function has one required argument, basically one statement that you have to give in order for the function to work, and you can give up to 255 conditions. All of these are separated by commas, so each argument or condition you would have a comma separated in between that. Arguments can be text strings, numbers, or cell references, and those can be absolute cell references or they can change. Down below it, you see the syntax of how that formula is actually put into the formula bar. And in this example, for the syntax, I've just used two text statements. It would be like someone's name, and that literal text would show. Anytime you do use literal text, though, that you would like to show, such as if you were going to try and concatenate email addresses, the literal text you show needs to be put into quotation marks so that it will show that. If it's not in quotation marks, then Excel will be looking for something else. It could be a cell or anything that's within this spreadsheet. So make sure you put those within quotation marks. Also, if you need a space in your concatenation, you'll need to put that into quotation marks as well. It's sort of like how you see in the example below, you have our cell reference A4, then a comma which separates that argument, and then you have a quotation mark to say that the next comma is an actual literal character, followed by the end quotation mark. Then we have another comma that separates the argument, and we end with a cell reference, as opposed to the, of course, the ending parentheses. So that concatenation there would basically give us, in the example that I'm going to show you, would be the first name, the comma, the space, and then the last name. You can also do the same thing as the concatenation operator with an ampersand. But if you ever plan on using this formula in a database that will be used in a web application or anything that's going outside of just that singular Excel sheet, you would want to use concatenate instead of the ampersand function, because the ampersand function doesn't work well with other applications. But it works fine if you just plan to use it in Excel, and it's a lot easier to remember. So if you were doing the ampersand, it would be equals the cell reference ampersand, and then you have your quotation marks, but you notice you don't actually have to use the commas in between the arguments to get the same expression. So I'm going to go into Excel and show you how that works. So here we have an Excel spreadsheet, and what I would like to do is put an additional column here where test 1 is. And instead of having two separate columns for the first name and the last name, I want to have a single column with both the first name and the last name separated by a comma and a space. So we'll start that by doing equals. Actually, I'm going to show you how you can get to that. And if you'll just start typing CON, then you'll see the formula come down here. And this little white box is very helpful to remind you how to put in the formulas. If you need any assistance with that, it'll probably yell at you if you do something wrong, so you'll definitely know. All right, so we're going to start out with our first cell reference, which is A4. Then we have to put in that comma there to tell it it's another argument. And in between those, we wanted to have a comma, so we're putting in our literal text marker, which is our quotation. We'll add a space, end that with another quotation mark. Add our second comma to say we're going to another cell. Click the last cell, end it with a parentheses, and I put that in the wrong cell. And then you can just use the fill handle to pull down, and those names will populate. Now this is a great thing and all, but it really is like, why would I need the first name and last name column if I'm going to have this concatenated column? You can hide these two first and last name columns, but you can't delete them, because if you delete them, then it's not going to have anything to reference to. Full name here in the header column. And we will hide columns A and B. And you do that by clicking up here, getting your two double-headed arrow, and clicking hide. And now we have our concatenation. Do we have any questions about that formula or how it was created? Pretty simple one. So the next one we're going to look at is the if function. And the if function basically is a logical statement that performs a test to determine whether a certain condition that you enter in the cell is true or false. It says, if this statement is true, do this. Or if the statement is false, do this. The syntax for the statement is equals if your logical test, separated by a comma, the value that you would like to see returned if the statement is true, a comma, and then the statement that you would like to see if or the value you would like to see if the statement is false. And based on this logical test, Excel will return the value of either which you have based on whether it being true or false. The example we have here is we are testing, we're testing whether if a student has completed their homework, and the example I'm going to show you next, then we're going to add a certain number of points to the student's average. And I will show you how that works now. So here's our spreadsheet again. And what I'm doing here is we have several different students in the program, and we've decided that if they have completed all their homework throughout the semester, then we're going to give them 3 homework bonus points designated here in the cell onto their semester average. So how we would do that is we'd first click in the cell and go to formulas, and this is under the logical category, and click if. So our first test here is to say we want to know if they have completed their homework or not. So we click in the homework cell. We're saying if I4 is equal to the text yes, if true, we will add 3 bonus points, and we will do, lost my place there. And we're referencing the bonus points down here in the cell here. Now, we have to make this an absolute cell reference. because if we drag our formula bar down, our fill formula, then that would change. The way you make it an absolute reference cell is to hit F4, and you'll notice that the cell has changed by putting these dollar signs in front, and that basically means that no matter what, that cell is going to stay the same. And again, the keyboard shortcut for that is F4. So if the statement is true, we are going to add 3 bonus points. If the statement is false, then we want to return the same value that was in the test average to begin with. They don't get any bonus points. So we click in cell H. Now this one can change because we are not in the formula reference, because we're going to want to have the exact same value that they have for the test average. Click OK and drag the formula down. Just kidding. Hold on. I messed up somewhere. Troubleshooting's always fun, isn't it? Spreadsheet where it's already done that, so I'm going to look at that and see what I've done wrong. Now that we have the correct formulas in here, the reason why it's different from the test average and we have a 76.25 versus a 76.3 is because we have different numbers of the decimal places showing, and we can fix that by putting one of those. Decimal places. And then it changes to the same one. Do you have any questions about the if function?
Say that formula again.
Sure. So the if function here is if I4, which is over here, the node, if I4 is equal to yes, then H4, the test average, you will have the absolute cell reference is added to that down here in 3, and then you have H4. And you can view your formulas in this format by clicking the control tilde, and that will show you how those formulas are calculated.
What do you say, control?
It's the control and then the tilde, it's right up above the tab key. It's the one that looks like the accent over the N they use in Espanol. the last one I'm going to show you is the VLOOKUP. So a VLOOKUP is a function that searches for the value in the leftmost column of a table array. And that's basically a table or a set of columns that you have established that holds your information. And it returns the value in the same row based on the index number. The index number is the column in the table array which matches the value that must be returned. And your index columns always start with 1. Sometimes in programming, those things like, especially with networking, the first number is 0, but that's not the case. In Excel, your first number is 1. Makes it easy and logical. Why we do that in other aspects of computing, but this start with a 0, I don't know. All right. And this is the syntax that you start with is the equal sign VLOOKUP. That's the value that you're looking at. Then the table that you're looking at the value for, and then the index number. The example that we're going to be working with will look like this. That's going to be our finished formula. VLOOKUP, parentheses, cell J4, absolute reference on the table here through J and K. So what we're doing here is instead of having to look at the semester average, the instructor basically wants to go ahead and just be able to quickly look up and not have to think about whether the student has an A, B, C, or D, or F based upon their semester average. The important thing to remember with the VLOOKUP is that this information already needs to be in a table specified. So this is going to be the information that we're actually looking at here. We'll start by going in formulas, and I believe that is a lookup and reference, and then the VLOOKUP formula. So the first cell that we need to look at is the lookup value. We are looking at, and I'll move this over here, we're looking at the semester average. The table array is the information located down here in the grading criteria. So we're looking at the semester average to determine what their grade's going to be. Again, this needs to be an absolute reference because we're not changing any of the cells here, and it always needs to look to this certain group of cells to determine what the semester average is going to be. So does anybody remember what key I need to press for that? F4? Good. Click in front of that. The index column number can be rather confusing. And basically what it's saying is, okay, of the 2 columns in the table array that you have told me to look at, which column am I looking at to give you the return value? In other words, okay, you want me to look at the 0, but what does 0 mean? 0 would return an F, and we want it to return the F, so we're looking at that in the second column. Does that kind of make sense? Yep. And the range lookup is nothing you need to worry about in this type of formula. And that will return the different lookups based on what their grade is. Another useful way that I don't have an example to show you here for would be if you have a long list of part numbers or that have a certain price that go to them, you could have a cell down here that would have this formula to look up the part number versus what the price is, and you could just enter that instead of having to look up what the price would be in a large table. These functions that I've showed you today are mostly useful in tables where you have a whole lot of entries. Like David has a Excel spreadsheet that he uses to log certain equipment. Well, he could look up and see what the model number for a certain brand of projector is, or how much the bulb costs for a certain value. Does anybody have any questions about the functions I've showed you today? No? Well, that's all of your time I'm going to take up unless you have any more questions. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any other formulas that you recommend using for quick workups and data when looking at data?
There is also an HLOOKUP, which would be, instead of doing, what VLOOKUP does is it looks up the leftmost columns, and I believe that an HLOOKUP actually does horizontal columns, so it depends on where you're looking at your data. And also, when you're doing a VLOOKUP, notice that some of the test averages are not, you don't have a 76.3 in your grading criteria. So until you go down to the next level, until you hit an 80, it's always going to return the value of C. So keep that in mind when you're doing a lookup, is it will do the number equal to or greater than until you hit the next criteria. All right, ladies, thank you for your time. I do appreciate it. Hope y'all have a great rest of the evening. And thank you for coming.